Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to vlog 238, the Kardashian Index. Oh yes, we're going to have some fun today. Wow. So what we're going to explore today is what exactly is the Kardashian Index. Yes, it is a thing. Who knew it was a thing? It's a thing. So we're going to look at the Kardashian Index. We're going to also explore the pretty strong critiques of the Kardashian Index and why it's gained some traction in the last 5 years. But we're also going to have a sort of meta-narrative through the vlog this week. And that meta-narrative that we'll hold on to through this pretty short session is about the role of social media in the dissemination of research, particularly you making active decisions about the role of social media in disseminating your research during your PhD and beyond. Okay, so what is the Kardashian Index? What does it mean? Okay, now firstly we need to recognise, and this is important in itself, that the Kardashian Index only applies to science and scientists. So that's an important caveat at the start and also adds a bit of interest to this conversation as well. So what the Kardashian Index measures is a discrepancy or a gap between a scientist's publication record as measured by the number of citations against the scientist's number of Twitter followers. I'm not making this up. So the Kardashian Index emerged in 2014 by a genome-based scientist based at the University of Liverpool. So Neil Hall published the Kardashian Index in 2014. So he developed this concept because he believed that certain scientists were not getting the credit and the profile that they deserved. And further, there were a bunch of pretenders, a bunch of scientists who were supposedly spruiking their wares above and beyond anything they demonstrated through citations and the scholarly literature. He stated, quote, "I am concerned that a phenomena similar to that of Kim Kardashian may also emerge in the scientific community," end of quote. So yes, there was an equation to work out the Kardashian Index, and it takes two variables. Firstly, the number of followers a scientist has on Twitter, and then the number of citations that scientist has received in the peer-reviewed literature. So they are the two variables. Okay, wow. Now there's an equation, obviously, and the K-index is created by a fraction. So hold on to yourself. The numerator of the fraction is the number of Twitter followers. Pretty straightforward. The denominator are the number of followers that the researcher should have, taking into account the citations on their research. Wow. So this is a thing, and this is a thing that some scientists take very, very seriously. Okay, so, well, look, let's try and follow them into that seriousness if we can. Just hold on to this. So what is this all about? Well, basically, it's about a scientist or a group of scientists calling out other scientists for spinning and selling their overblown research through Twitter. Notice it's the only social media variable that we're investigating is Twitter. Okay. And then it also acknowledges that other scientists are undervalued by this measure. Okay, so there it is. So there's the Kardashian Index for you. You can work out your own, very straightforward, plug in some very simple variables. Thanks for playing. Okay, so there's the Kardashian Index. Now let's look at the critiques of the Kardashian Index and what we learn through those critiques. Now, firstly and obviously, the first critique of the Kardashian Index is a really straightforward one. the entire premise of the K index is that the citations granted to a scientist are a signifier of scientific value. Okay, so as we talked about in the last blog, there is, of course, a politics, struggle over meaning, politics to citation. Research that is desperately wrong, fraudulent, retracted, is cited. Also, really outstanding research is not cited because of gatekeeping of journals, particular nationalities are undercited, particular languages are undercited, and of course women are undercited. Okay, so the assumption that citations confirm intellectual value is mistaken. First up. Now, let me just hammer out some quick critiques when we're all looking at citations in our career and also into other colleagues' career. Now, when you're dealing with citations, the size of the field is incredibly important. So a large field results in a higher probability that your research will be cited. Now, if you mention cancer, you have a very high chance of that research being cited. If, however, you are a scholar of Ron Sexsmith, hi to the other two people on planet Earth who write about Ron Sexsmith. Ron Sexsmith is a legend, but say you work on Ron Sexsmith, then you've got a very small citation opportunity. Okay, and relevance also matters to the citation matter here. So let's keep with cancer. So for example, lung cancer is an incredibly big field. So if you write on lung cancer, you've got a very good chance of your research being cited. Cancer of the penis is a smaller field, incredibly important, but because it is a smaller field, you are less likely to be cited. Okay, so as you can see, this notion that quality is measured through citation is wrong, particularly if you work in a smaller field where you will receive smaller citations. Also, and I keep hammering this home because it's so important, that seriously wrong research is cited a lot. And let's just use Pons and Fleischmann's cold fusion paper from 1989. It's funny, while I've been preparing this vlog, I've gone back to this article and the history of this article. Look, it's just stunning, absolutely stunning, 1989. If you're interested in looking at what's called bad science and how it moves through the field, this is the archetype, okay? So this bad science in this article, cold fusion, 1989, has received thousands of citations. Okay, so my second critique of the K index, the Kardashian Index, is that, and this is sort of my big one to be honest with you, it lets an array of scientists off the hook. Because by the Kardashian Index, certain scientists are suggesting that not using social media is an option, and indeed gives one credibility. So if you use Twitter to talk about your research, it's a bit tacky. It's a bit of a problem. Okay, so it works from the assumption that publications and citations are enough. But colleagues, it's not 1992 or 2002 or 2012. Academic citations today are not the only configuration of value. And let's be honest, if citations were working incredibly well, we wouldn't have invented all these other terms to assess research, like esteem, impact, engagement. So we have all of these terms because if researchers are actually interested in disseminating their research beyond other academics, then you are going to have to use other interfaces. Now, we know that academic citations are fine. I'm not knocking academic citations. There are critiques of it. If you're cited by colleagues, that's tremendous. Tick, brilliant. But the next question for you as a researcher is, who are your audiences? Who do you want to reach? And as academics, intellectuals, scholars, researchers, whatever noun you would like to use, we should have a commitment to the public and the public good, wherever we may find it. But instead of thinking about the now and living actively and passionately in our present, the context of our present in research, and all the new strategies for research dissemination that exist, of which altmetrics is an example, a flawed one, but altmetrics is there, that instead we've got a bunch of people still doing the posh, noblesse oblige, it's citations or nothing. And of course what's happening is a group of people are looking down their noses at social media. Now, such an ideology has a history of about 200 years. Popular culture has been demeaned and marginalised throughout its entire history. We only have to think about Matthew Arnold's book, Culture and Anarchy, that was published in 1869. And that book affirmed high culture, quote, sweetness and light, end of quote, and demeaned low culture, popular culture, because it leads to drinking, laziness, and obviously revolution. All the good stuff. So this is restating the old mantras of really 2 centuries ago. High culture is safe, valid and meaningful. Refereed articles are verified, rigorous and transparent. But actually, social media has its own literacies, its own ways of exploring knowledge, and it takes skills, literacies, to translate knowledge from one mode, refereed literature, into alternative modes. That's not easy, that takes literacy. So why would there be any correlation between social media and citations in peer-reviewed literature? Why would there be a correlation? Just like, why would there be a correlation between salami and a steering wheel? So actually, the K-index reveals the exact opposite of what it was attempting to expose. That the credible researchers, the cited researchers, have not worked hard enough to disseminate their research through social media. They're elitist, they're interested in how their research is investigated and explored and used by their colleagues, and not much interest in what happens beyond a university. Okay, so thirdly, the Kardashian Index has a giggle, just a whiff of academic jealousy about it. Now, I've seen in this current job a lot of this from senior colleagues around the world. So what happens all the time, almost on a daily basis. A senior colleague is horrified, yes, horrified, that a junior academic, or indeed, oh my goodness me, a PhD student, is receiving attention on their research. And of course, the silent statement that often follows the, they're getting attention on their research, the silent statement behind that is always, my research is so much better. Why aren't I getting the attention? Okay, so the relationship between visibility and contribution is arbitrary and subjective. It's not a science, it's arbitrary and subjective. Remember, we're dealing with a fraction and 2 algebraic variables in the Kardashian Index. That is not science. As Katie Mack, an astrophysicist at the University of Melbourne, stated, quote, this paper suggests that only highly cited scientists deserve a large following on Twitter, and everyone else should just shut up, end of quote. Good on you, Katie. Now, she was offended because she read the Kardashian Index as disrespect. disrespect of scientists who are trying to connect with the public, and indeed in her case, show the fully fleshed life of a scientist. She argued that Twitter was a way for her to model a scientific career that was particularly important for women. Good critique, tick. And then there's another critique from Kate Clancey, an anthropologist at the University of Illinois. And she argues that the K-index, quote, punches at people with less power. That makes it not funny. End of quote. Okay. She also logged the sexism behind the Kardashian label as a site of unwarranted fame. Okay, because look, we could have chosen Hugh Hefner. Hugh Hefner didn't get out of a dressing gown in 50 years. The Hefner Index is of great interest to me. But what was significant, the irony of sort of doing the sexist critique of the Kardashian Index, the irony is that the K-index actually showed, if you plugged in the variables, that very few women have an inflated Twitter following. So indeed, women have fewer followers than would be expected by the Kardashian Index. Okay, so most Kardashians are actually men. Right. Now, all of that critique's fine. This is the one I'm interested in, from neuroscientist Mika Allen from University College London. Now, Mika went on full attack. This was an interesting critique, this one, and stated, quote, "It may not seem like it now, but in time it will be clear that what we do is just as much a part of scientific processes as those lofty nature papers." End of quote. Wow, now that's interesting. Don't know if that's right, but wow, it's interesting. And fourthly, I think it is important that we note the irony of Neil Hall's article. So Neil Hall put the word Kardashian into his title so it would get noticed. Okay, and the ironies continue. Chris Woolson published an article in Nature on the Kardashian Index. Wow. And that article was assessed by altmetrics. Pot, kettle, black. Finally, let's just get into disintermediation here. Let's get into how social media can challenge power structures. Social media moves researchers outside of gatekeepers and outside of their influence. Academic journals are consensual knowledge systems. The boundaries are patrolled and monitored by refereeing. Remember, I'm in favour of peer review, but you've got to call this what it is. So what peer reviewing does is it says there are insiders and there are outsiders. And if you doubt the critique I'm making here, you only have to look at right now, today, this year, how the ultra-realist criminologists are being treated currently in British criminology journals. If you think, oh yes, we're interested in new ideas, innovation and so forth, look at how the ultra-realist criminologists are being treated in British criminology at the moment, and that'll answer your question. So right now there are hundreds, thousands of avenues to find new and interesting and interested audiences. Twitter is a great one, but as we've talked about in an earlier vlog, the video abstract is incredibly important for early career researchers, PhD students, in drawing attention to their research. And when you combine a video abstract and Twitter, beautiful, winning. So for the groups, the theorists and the researchers that are outside of the mainstream, that are rarely validated by gatekeepers, then social media, all the different platforms, has value. And I do want to make the point too that when we're dealing with social media, and this was the other problem with the Kardashian Index, when we're dealing with social media are incredibly diverse. So Instagram is very different from Snapchat, Facebook is very different from YouTube. Each has different science codes, literacies, genres that we deal with. So therefore the Kardashian Index is not measuring sort of an academic with their butt out of a pair of trousers on Instagram. So like we're oh, it's not measuring that. The supposed problem is, and the problem is, academics using Twitter to talk about their research. That's supposedly the problem of our time. So when we start to see the issue in this way, we see really what this is about is academic jealousy. What this is about is a few scientists having a bit of spotlight deprivation and thinking that they're the only people that can offer a commentary about science. And I would just remind you that what we've talked about today is about, probably capital S, science. It's important to note that, of course, most disciplines are not science. There are remarkable disciplines in media, communication and cultural studies that take social media as their topic, as their project. So saying Twitter is a problem for the researchers that look at Twitter, that's a bit of a challenge, okay? So there are a group of scholars that use Twitter as their source material as much as a chemist would use a pipette, right? So much for the Kardashian Index. Yep, look, it's quirky, it's funny, but it also reveals a lot, I think, about the brittleness of a researcher's ego. Can I say the concept that I'm terribly interested in, that I just want to flag now, there's not quite enough literature for me to do a vlog on it yet, but I hope in a year's time there may be. The concept is attention inequality. Attention inequality. That for me is the important concept, not the Kardashian Index, attention inequality. And what this concept is arguing is once researchers start to receive attention, then that attention cascades, and that's currently being studied qual quam. So as doctoral students, finding audiences, finding any audience, finding diverse audiences, that's the challenge at the start. But once you start to get that momentum happening, it is remarkable where your research can land. Now, you're not being a Kardashian. You're being a public intellectual, maybe a critical intellectual, maybe even an organic intellectual, because you're trying to translate your research for new audiences, translate your research for citizens who are paying for you to conduct that research. All of us today can choose where our attention is placed. But our role as researchers is to improve the calibre of information that is available to citizens to enable a productive citizenship. That's the job. Research to this day remains distinct from reality television. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.